that I'm a lover of the winemaker and the story behind the wine because it was a in your face, amazing wine, big wine people. And you want something that's shocking and it's amazing and something completely different than what you're
I really want people to understand when we hear your opinions, where it comes from. So
Sure.
from a personal point of view, what got you excited about wine? How did that happen? Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into wine from the beginning?
Yeah. Honestly, it was a happy accident. So I work for a captive insurance company. So we have our own programs, we have our own plans. I don't broker things out. I only work for one company. And I got to the point in my career with them that I really wanted to be good at something, really known for something. And I knew we had a beverage policy coming down the line. I am in the heart of the Willamette Valley. So there's a lot of vineyards, there's a lot of agriculture, and farming is my background. So I really wanted something that had ag base to it. And I had started losing my vineyard clients because I didn't have a wine policy to be able to kind of like package things together, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so I apparently had been complaining quite a bit that we didn't have something like this. So the company had decided to develop it. They saw the need for it. And it wasn't just me complaining. I don't have that much power. Let's just make that really evident and apparent. I don't have that much power. But I was one of the probably the biggest proponents for it. And I had planned on going into the beer industry because I liked beer. I didn't drink wine at all. I live in Eola Hills, that ABA, which is an amazing place for wine. But I didn't really drink it because I didn't understand it and I was afraid of it, is really the honest answer to that. And so for me, it's easier to walk into a restaurant going, hey, I want an IPA because I know exactly what I'm going to get
Mhm.
versus going, hey, I want a Pinot. And you get this massive range of wine from all over the world and all over these styles and blah, blah, blah. And to me, that's so intimidating. But as fate would have it, the company came out with a wine policy first, and the beer policy did not have a timeline on it for being dropped, so to speak, or available. And I'm like, well, damn, I guess wine it is. And so I picked it up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get serious about this. But being a farmer's daughter and listening to my dad for years talk about like these salesmen and these business people that were helping him, if they didn't understand what he was doing, he wanted nothing to do with them. And I knew nothing about wine. And so I asked the right people the right questions. They were willing to educate me. And then I ended up going back to Linfield University, which is our local college here, and did their immersion program and really got into understanding the wine industry from start to finish. So we started with dirt and we ended up with the International Pinot Noir celebration, which is in McMinnville. It's an amazing event, and learned everything in between. And I was hooked. And then, kind of the podcast came from there. So, and then the love of wine. So I actually would say that I'm a lover of the winemaker and the story behind the wine because the personality to me makes the wine that much more prolific and enjoyable. And then wine is probably a really close number two.
Where you live? Can I ask,
Yes.
are you more Pinot Noir or more Chardonnay? Is that a fair question?
It's a really fair question. And I can tell you what my aha wine was
Okay,
because
great.
it is definitely one of my favorites to this day. I would say Pinot Noir versus Chardonnay. I'd go Riesling. That's probably my favorite.
Okay.
And Riesling really speaks terroir as far as where it's from. And so it really kind of holds that. I
Mhm.
like Chardonnay really well. Willamette Valley Chardonnay. And I love Pinot too, but I really love a great Riesling. But I will say that my aha wine is that wine that like really like goes, kind of pows in your face. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, now I get it. Now I get why all these people are such wine freaks, and they're so excited about wine. And there is a wine maker here who is very, very well known. He's actually one of my last episodes on the podcast, Robert Britton. And he planted a block of Syrah on his vineyard, which is on the very west side of the Willamette Valley. It's a very cool site. It's right up against the coastal mountains, heading over to the beach. And people told him he was freaking nuts. You can't grow Syrah in that cold of a climate. And It was a in your face, amazing wine. I, to this day, like if I have friends over that are big wine people and you want something that's shocking and it's amazing and something completely different than what you're expecting, Robert Britton Syrah is my wine to go to, every time.
Wow, that's a nice tease. Now I want to try his
Yeah.
wine. That's fantastic.
You
So
really should. He originally was a Napa Valley winemaker, and he's been up here for like the last 15 or 20 years, and really has helped push the movement for Willamette Valley Chardonnay. But
outstanding.
his Syrah, actually, really all of his wines are great, but that Syrah is like my intro went deep wine. Yeah.
I know you mentioned if you'd be emotionally upset if something were to happen, but
Mhm.
what kind of questions, if I were to come to you with my to get a policy, what kind of answers should I have walking in the door to meet with you?
I would say that having a good inventory and idea of what you have is start one. And this goes in the same conversation I have with people daily about, what does your jewelry collection looks like? What does your art collection look like? Because there's limits on everybody's policy for collections. And
Okay.
same thing with pieces of jewelry. So that would be where I would say to start. Are you inventorying your bottles? Do you really know how much you have? Do you have any really high end, high priced bottles that we need to worry about? Because that's going to determine which way I decide to send you and what we decide to do for a policy. I don't have access to a specific wine collector's policy. Like if you're collecting $5,000, $10,000 bottles of wine, there are better policies out there, and I'm happy to direct you where those are at. But if
Mhm.
you are a drinker of your wine, you have, I just quoted one last week. They have $150,000 worth of wine. We put it on their home policy because it can be added to your personal property amounts.
Okay.
Um, Not every insurance company will do that. And my underwriting team probably hates me because I send them the weirdest questions sometimes. I'm like, tell me how this is going to get covered. Is this a good idea for us to cover this? And that is a big thing with insurance in general, but specifically when you have collections like this, you want to make sure your agent knows what they're talking about. Um, I don't want to insure something or somebody and go, oh yeah, we could totally do that. And then on claims day, I'm like, oh yeah, just kidding. That's not covered. That's excluded. And because that makes me look like a real bad guy. And I don't want to be a bad guy. And I take all this stuff home very personally. And so we really work hard in a very high end level upfront, whether it's a home policy, an auto policy, or it's a winery or a big business. I mean, we want to make sure that we've got the details lined out really well.
I love that. And so I think some people, the first thing they think of is physical damage to the bottle,
Yeah.
but things like cork taint, like in other words, if I open the bottle and it didn't survive as well as it could, is that covered
Hmm.
by insurance?
That one's a rough one,
Yeah.
because a lot of things come into that, and I cannot cover that. So on our
Okay.
policies, with which is a normal homeowners renters type policy, it's going to be breakage, theft, earthquake. If you add it, things like that, maybe
Okay.
even water damage. But when you're looking for cork taint and bottle, like even label damage and stuff, that's going to be more of a specified specific policy that is going to be done through more of a brokerage house, like a Lloyd's of London or I think an AXA or American Modern, something like that. They have specific policies for wine, but a lot of them will not cover cork taint because a lot of times it is condition. There can be a flaw in the cork, just
Mhm.
naturally. But B, did you store it right? Did you store it upright in the sunshine? Did you store it, the way it's supposed to be done? And so some of that stuff is excluded. So I think you run the risk of cork taint just as an owner of that bottle of wine.
From consumer to vineyard and winery. Uh, in 2022, I was lucky enough I got to take part in a harvest. And I'm sure as you know, being so much in love with wine country, you don't even know what you don't know. There's so much going on there. So starting off, I want to hear about it in general, but are there just common misconceptions even about what should be insured and covered?
I mean, depending on what state you're in, you have your liquor control commission. And so if you are selling wine, they are requiring that you have liquor liability. That way, if somebody overdrinks or whatever, you are covered for their liquor consumption, more or less. The biggest misconceptions I see a lot of policies done by really the only carrier that was really in town, and their policies are very generic. And most people, I will say almost all people, don't speak insurance. And so you don't know what you're covered for until you're not covered for it. And so there's a lot of holes, gaps, and things like that if you're not paying attention. And so that to me is why the education piece was so important. And that way I know what all the equipment is that you're utilizing. So when you call me and say, hey, I have this pneumatic press that, blah, 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 we need to make sure we get that covered, or whatever they're doing. They run some forklift through some, poly tank or whatever. So knowing what's needing to be insured and what's not needing to be insured, or just even the education piece of what they do and don't have currently is where we start. And then understanding the operation is even bigger, because you do have these big commercial wineries that, they do everything. But then you have some that are alternating proprietorships, and you have some that are custom crush, and you have, so you have all these also different business models on top of it. So you have to understand what's going on.
And I guess that's where it helps that you enjoy wine and you're so deep into the wine world, is, as you said, even though they're in their world immersed, they don't see it from the angle that you see it of protection and liability. So even if they think they're being responsible, chances are they might be missing something by accident.
Yeah, I mean, we had in 2020 when we had the big smoke event over here, with our farm policies, we have a little bit of coverage for smoke taint built into our farm policies, because there is a big difference of what's covered in the vineyard and what's covered in the winery. So with the smoke, it was a vineyard policy and a farm policy because that's where the damage happened. And because one of my wineries did not tell me that they had leased this other vineyard, we didn't cover it. And they just assumed that because it was, farming, that it would be covered under their farm policy. So I'm trying to be very explicit. Like when you change locations, whether you are leasing a new vineyard or you've moved your operations, which happens all the time. It's like merry-go-rounds around here. People change from location to location because of, X, Y, and Z. I'm like, you have to let me know, because if you don't, that wine's not covered.
So whether we're a consumer, whether we're a winemaker, whether we're a vineyard, and we want to learn more about insurance, tell us website, social media, what's the best way to learn more about your insurance work?
I would say that a Wine Crush podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok are probably the best places to go, because I kind of skirt both sides of the fence with that. We do some Insure What You Love Thursday content, which is just kind of breaking down some of this stuff into English to where you can understand it. But honestly, either direct messaging me or calling me directly is probably the best way to actually get your questions answered the best way possible. Our insurewhatyouLove.com is more of a generic look at the insurance that we do. But then you can also go to my Country Financial page as well and get actual product specific with that.